I'm excited for the turnout, much more than I expected, so I appreciate everybody taking the time to come down and making the effort. And thanks for Jim for getting in touch with me to make this happen. So like Jim said, I'm controller at Seattle Center, which is physically located just across the Levelshue Casino in Auburn. And our airspace encompasses pretty much the entire Northwest, the boundary to the south with Oakland Center, and then the boundary to the east with Salt Lake Center. Basically all the way to eastern Washington, Canadian border, down to my area, the center, which is in the very northern part of California, including Mount Shasta, Klamath Falls, just south of Bend, Oregon, and Redmond area, over to the coast, including Arcata and Eureka, California, Crescent City, North Bend, Coos Bay, Eugene, Medford, and Ashland as well. So the center itself is split up into 4 different areas, so it encompasses quite a large amount of space. So again, I know your time is valuable, and I appreciate you guys attending, and I'll do my very best to make it worthwhile. So make sure that's working. All right.
Excuse me, Garrett, for 1
Yes.
second. Those that you came in after I made the announcement, this is the Wings sign-up sheet, so if you haven't signed up for it, let me know and I'll get it to you. Just your name and email address is all I want.
So as I go along, please don't hesitate to speak up and ask for any clarification, or if you have any questions or anything to contribute or thoughts or anything like that. So I'm by no means the ultimate authority on the issue. So, the subject of pilot controller communications, to me, is pretty expansive, so I'll try to focus on what I think are the important parts of it, and then at the last portion is a pretty practical advice and sort of things, both VFR and IFR, that we can talk about, where I think you can really make an impact and have better communication with air traffic. So I told you where I work. You might be wondering a little bit more, who am I? You might be asking yourself, who is this guy?
Who is this guy?
Who is this guy? So I grew up in the Bay Area until about 1993. I'm 34, just for reference. But I've been in the Seattle area for about 20 years. This is me at the San Francisco airport when I was probably 6 or 7 years old. We had a family friend who worked at the United Airlines maintenance facility. And I took a trip out there and was able to, that's me standing next to a 747. Yeah. So I've been here for 20 years. I got my pilot's license in 2000 in Olympia, in a 152. My stepfather had an airplane, a couple different airplanes actually, while I was growing up in high school and beyond, and was able to get a lot of unofficial time with him as well, and the Skyhawk and the Detail Bonanza. So I have some pretty good memories. I haven't been current for a while, just for financial reasons mostly, but a lot of good memories flying around Puget Sound and Central California and Oshkosh and down to Baja, Mexico. So I was hired in 2010 by the FAA, finished training in 2012. That's a pretty typical timeline. And bottom line is I'm pretty passionate about aviation, and I'm here because I think it's important for pilots and controllers to better understand each other so that we can better communicate and work together as a team. Just an overview of some of the things I'm going to talk about. Before discussing the practical and the operational aspects and advice that I have, I think it's important to take a step back and look at some of the relationship and the associated roles that we have between each other, and see, just share a common goal and see what that is. So pilots and controllers need to work as a team, and how can we collaborate to help us do that, to improve safety. Also want to look at just quickly, working environment comparison. It's important to realize that your environment that you work in, the cockpit, is much different than the environment that I work in. And I understand that, having experience in the cockpit, that there are controllers who may not, and forget that sometimes. And sometimes that's where conflict comes up. There's a lot of common misconceptions. There's actually a report that I found that I have a copy of a couple of reports that I'll reference here if anybody wants to take a look at them. But this report gives a good insight into common misconceptions from both sides and how to, and actually offers some solutions on how to improve those misconceptions or get rid of them. So then the practical advice for more effective communications with ATC, and then I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions and answers, I hope. At the end, we should have plenty of time. Jim told me that there's nobody taking the room after us, so. So if the goal is to improve safety and efficiency through effective communications and teamwork, how can we achieve this? Training and knowledge sharing, I think, is pretty key. Specifically, I try to offer my trainees, even though I've been a controller for 5 years and finished training for about 3 years, it's just the nature of the job is you're almost immediately into training new controllers as they come through. And I specifically try to offer trainees the pilot perspective in a lot of different situations so that they can understand what's going on the other end. And remember that there is someone actually on the other end of the radio. It's sometimes it gets robotic because they're looking at a display and a scope, and they forget that someone actually is in a cockpit. My experience is limited in the cockpit, which is why these discussions are helpful, and I hope to learn as much as I can, and hopefully you can as well. It's another reason I always recommend why taking a facility tour for pilots. The rain check program is not existent anymore, but if you have a relationship with a controller or want to get in touch with me, I'm more than happy to make arrangements to get a tour, because it's really important to see what actually goes on. So for the pilot-controller relationship, what do we have in common, and what are our differences? Does anybody have anything come to mind?
We're all interested in a safe outcome.
That's right. That's a big one. That, I think, is our shared goal. And I know I hear pilots who say that they're afraid to call for flight following sometimes, and there are different reasons for that, but I hope that people remember that it is a shared goal, and we're there to help. And I know some people have had bad experiences, so maybe that's part of what it is about. But
I did the Operation Rain Check in 1979,
yeah.
And I thought it was just huge. Leonard Kutke did the tour, and I guess he's somewhat of a legend over there. He's probably long gone now, but how important it was for me to understand that there was people on the other end. And,
yeah.
That it wasn't just a robotic voice. But one thing I've noticed in the last, not necessarily a hard time frame, but in the last probably 10 years, is a more cooperative controller. Most of my flying, any distance is all IFR, but a better cooperation, a friendlier, instead of this mechanical type thing. It's people plugging in with people. I don't know. I don't necessarily know what changed. Maybe it was my approach. Maybe it was a conscious effort on the part of air traffic control to, like the IRS, to be a little friendlier.
That's a lousy comparison.
No, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I can't. Since I've only been in the agency for 5 years, it's hard for me to measure it against anything. I see good and bad from controllers that I work with, as far as that goes. being more cooperative.
It's pretty rare in today's world, I'm talking about my experience, very rare to have an experience that I wouldn't consider positive with ATC. Very, very rare. I've had a couple, and I've had one where I've unplugged. You're done. I just fired you. And but in today's world, I personally am very pleased with the interactions with ATC.
Good. I'm glad to hear. Anybody else have any thoughts before we move forward?
Just a big deal.
Yeah.
I think you guys are great.
I wanted to add something too
Yeah.
from the CFI perspective. Often when I'm training students, I ask the controller for help in doing that, like giving me block altitudes and simulated failures and simulated approaches and all that. And I've always found they're very, very helpful.
Good.
And they, I think they appreciate when I tell them, you know, that it's a student, and so they can kind of calibrate that. They understand a student won't be perfect.
Yeah.
And we're doing it in VFR conditions, but, and even in IFAR in the clouds, I've asked for it, they've been very, every time I get it, they'll give me a block altitude in the clouds, so I can do the instrument student in the
Yeah.
clouds, and he can be off by 500 feet, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
Because ATC's got that protected. So
Right.
that takes cooperation. I'm sure it's not easy for ATC, because you have to block out more.
Depends on the situation, but in a lot of cases, it's not that big of a deal.
It's appreciated.
Good. Yeah.
We used to find a difference in cultures. We went from SoCal up to Whitby, and coming out of LA Center, things were pretty normal. Coming into Oakland, things got a little tight and unfriendly, and it was so nice to come into Seattle Center because you were coming home. Now, whether they were just used to the Navy flyers coming out of Whitby, but there was a definite difference in cultures between the centers, and that was 30 years ago. So I don't know if that still exists, but
I think to a degree it does. I think a lot, sometimes it has some, what's coming into play is staffing issues. And just the overall mood of the facility itself sort of blends over into the frequency. So I know that several years ago, Oakland Center still was struggling with some management and staffing issues, so.
Doug was talking about experiences, mostly good, some bad. I think one of the problems is you have one of those bad experiences where a controller gets short with you, or you've made a mistake, or you're not where you're supposed to, whatever happens. That one bad experience kind of colors and makes you a little bit gun shy.
Yeah.
The next couple of times, either going through that area or coming up on the same frequency. You don't want to make the mistake again, so there's a little hesitation there.
Yeah,
You
I'd had the
can
same experience myself.
You
Yeah.
can have 100 good experiences, but it's the one bad one you remember.
Right. Right. Great, thank you. Yeah. I'll talk a little bit more about that too, actually, a little bit later. So, teamwork and the pilot-controller relationship, again, these are the kind of the big points that I see is what's important. Professionalism on both sides. If we can't be professional with each other, then obviously conflicts are just gonna get worse. But I'm glad to hear that everyone seems to have a pretty good experience on the most part. Trust but verify. So we trust you to listen to our instructions and take our advice in different situations, and you trust us to keep you safe. If it's like following, then traffic calls and letting you know about the weather and other issues that might be important. And if you're IFAR, you certainly expect separation to a certain degree. So there's a lot of expectations that sort of blend over into that trust issue, and they're both somewhat related. And then again, we have a shared responsibility, and it's by design. The AIM says, the quote I took was, the responsibilities of the pilot and the controller intentionally overlap in many areas, providing a degree of redundancy. And should one or the other fail in any manner, this overlapping responsibility is expected to compensate in many cases for failures that may affect safety. So collaboration as a tool, and I don't need to convince you that it's worthy because you're here, so I appreciate that. I believe strongly in the benefits of collaboration, and there are experts that are much smarter than me who have carefully looked at it and analyzed it and recognized its importance. So for talks like this and for this specific talk, I looked at a couple different reports that have come out over the last several years to prepare and sort of think about the outside view looking in and what's important and what works. So the strong positive correlation between improved safety rates and effective pilot-controller collaboration. This was studied by from a report that came out in 2003. The GAIN, I don't know if anybody's heard of GAIN. I hadn't heard it before I looked into this, but GAIN was the Global Aviation Information Network. It's now supported, the reports that they created are supported by a Flight Safety Foundation. But the FAA first proposed the Global Aviation Information Network in the late 90s and then ended its support in 2007. But during about a 4-year period, 2000, 2004, they were able to put together several different reports and studies, with many of them focused on airline operations. However, most of the lessons learned, specifically pilot-controller issues, can bleed over and can apply to general aviation as well. So this report, specifically the Pilot-Controller Collaboration Initiatives report, looked at 27 global collaborative initiatives, and they looked at 8 national or multinational levels, and then they looked at 19 on a local or operational level. And they summarized each initiative in order to overview how safety and efficiency were positively affected when controllers and pilots increased their knowledge of each other's job responsibilities, capacities, and limitations. The notable quote that I took from it was, quote, "Although pilots and controllers throughout the world work together on a daily basis to transport millions of passengers safely and efficiently to their destinations, the examples in this report show the related but often overlooked importance of effective communication between the two groups outside the cockpit, radar room, and control room." I also looked at a couple other reports that specifically address how to increase awareness and understanding between the two groups. The 1998 Aviation Safety Reporting System report, which is operated by NASA, on pilot interruptions and distractions. They looked at, and I'm actually going to reference that much more specifically on with a little more detail. And then also 2004, another GAIN report on common pilot controller misconceptions, which I'll also reference a bit more later. We talked about Operation Rain Check, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. I think it was before I was in the agency. I think it got killed after 9/11 for security reasons, and then it never got brought back. But I can tell you that security concerns, despite of what's happened in Chicago and other things that have happened around the country, there is pretty, at least at Seattle Center, it's pretty open. If a pilot gets in touch with someone and wants to come and take a tour of the facility, I don't see any issue with that. Shouldn't have any problem with it. Controllers have what's called a flight deck training program, and you might have familiar with that. I don't know if you were still flying for Alaska when that was going on, or if you ever had a controller come in the flight deck on flight. They restarted this for controllers in 2012, and it allows us to get official duty time to go actually on commercial flights and air cargo flights in the flight deck twice a year and get some familiar time in those environments. It does include a GA provision to actually do flight deck training on GA flights, but the problem is the flight has to exceed 3 hours, and then the FAA won't reimburse you for that. So it's pretty useless the way I see it.
I was gonna ask about that, because
Yeah.
I've been involved in both, but
Yeah.
when you're at jump seat in an air carrier airplane, it's a totally different experience than
Yeah.
riding with a guy who's flying by himself. And,
Yeah, and it's you're paying for it, and so it's a whole nother issue versus for them, it's usually if I'm sitting in the jump seat, then it's.
well, I was
it's not-
thinking even of the financial part
Okay.
at all, but just, you have 2 guys, sometimes 3.
Yeah,
And
true.
then there's a lot more coordination, a lot higher level of training. stuff like that, but, you know, one guy by himself, especially if he's flying IFR,
Yeah,
can get his hands full, you know, in a hurry.
yeah, for sure.
Situations.
Yeah. So I wish it was different. I wish more pilot, or much more controllers were given the opportunity, especially on general aviation flights, to see what goes on and see what it's like.
Posner, maybe that's something that we could do. Volunteer to take guys for rides.
Well, actually, I used to do that in the Bay Area a while back, where I got to know the controllers at the Palo Alto Tower real well. So take them for a ride, and say, okay, you work the radios.
Smart.
I want to see how it's done. And they would, to completely turn their head around and be on the opposite side of that was very interesting to watch.
It's not easy. I've definitely tried. And it
You
is.
get back on the ground and say, that was
Yeah.
different. But
It's
I
hard to
think
say.
that's a great idea, Bob, is to, take it, how do we do that? Can we coordinate something, Garrett, or where we can offer controllers to come on over and go for a ride?
I'll look into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
Some
very
strategies, some
interested.
liability
Auburn Airport,
issues
how
or
close to
something.
the facility?
It's only about a 10 or 15-minute drive. Yeah, it's right there.
Is that the closest airport?
Yeah, I think so, for sure.
Then the first thing we'll do is take them in on a VFR flight into CTEC. Okay, number 24. Start the flight with, watch this.
No, I think that would be great. I could find a list of, it wouldn't take me long to find a list of controllers that
Start
would
me
be
off
interested.
about that.
So again, ask me for a tour. You know, if you don't know a controller, you're not comfortable asking the tower controller, whatever the case may be, or feel free to give me a call. If you want to go see the approach control, if you want to go see the tower somewhere, wherever it might be, even though I don't work there, I should be able to get you in touch with someone who can make arrangements. So
Here, what's your email?
it is. I should have had it on this page. I knew it. It's GARR. I have it at the end as well too. But GARRETWILK@gmail.com.
Thank you.
We have a SeaTac tower controller here at this airport,
Oh, good.
Matt Wallander.
Have you been up there? Has anybody been up there to the tower?
Fascinating place.
Yeah. Pretty fancy equipment they have up there too. It's
Yep.
pretty nice.
Yep.
The cab is up at the tower, at the pattern altitude.
Is it really? It's a pretty good view, yeah. So I'll have both my phone number and my email at the end too, for anybody that misses it.
Garrett, if we were to organize a group like, let's say, we won't call it Operation Rain Check because that's a thing of the past, but if we were to organize a group from Bremerton amongst this group, let's say, what would be the ideal group size?
Yeah, I would say per group each time, 5 to 10 would probably be the best to
Okay.
manage, not only
Okay.
for the security folks, but also for just being able, for everyone to be able to have some time to actually, effectively see stuff and people to answer questions and things like that, so.
I don't know, I mean, this is Garrett's program, not Doug's, but how many went on Operation Rain Check? How many ever did? Seriously, wow.
Well, I have a question about that. I went to Green River and got their ATC degree
Oh.
and worked as an intern for a while. Do you know if that program is still in effect?
It is, yeah. We have
Where
interns
actually-
there all the time from Green River, and then a lot of them end up getting hired at Seattle Center because of
Well, I didn't.
face-to-face experience.
From a standpoint of, the reason I'm mentioning that, from a standpoint of pilots, especially those who want to use flight following or want to go back and forth to SeaTac, which quite frankly is, I don't know how they could make it any simpler, but in and out of SeaTac is very simple. But also then in the instrument environment, being in Auburn, and they'll actually plug you in, or at least on rain check, they'll plug you in with a controller and maneuver airplane, you're not, but maneuvering airplanes, and to be able to see so that when you're in the instrument environment, you know what he or she is going through on the ground. And it's not, the whole world doesn't necessarily revolve around you, but you can see a bigger picture. I found that rain check was very valuable. It was early in my instrument flying days in 79, early 79. And if we could organize a group that could go over and see that, especially those that are still flying, and especially those that are flying in the instrument environment, it's just a great education, awesome education.
Yeah, and we would definitely get you plugged in. And get you to see actually what we see. It is a bit different. We go to the approach control, what they see, their systems and their displays are a bit different, but on a whole, the information's the same for them as it is for us, so.
Are there any videos that show the same thing? Must one physically have to tour that facility?
I haven't seen many. The FAA is very weird about, we can't even take photos and share them, and you know, in order to get approval for that, it's kind of a big deal. So they don't, and I wish it were different. If I found something like that, I've looked before, I haven't seen anything like that, but I wish, yeah, that you didn't have to actually physically go just to see it. Although I think there's a huge value in doing it.
Are there any training videos that have already been approved?
There may be. There may be.
That would be the way to look for it, because those already have gone through the process. But
Yeah.
that they would show it at an ATC class, for instance.
Yeah, let me make a note of that and see if I can find something. So for the, real quick, the working environment comparison, just helps to reinforce the fact that both pilots and controllers are surrounded by all sorts of different things, equipment, that make us vulnerable to workload saturation. And as my coworker, who's a CFII and King Air pilot, if that's what he calls it, workload saturation, I'm sure he picked it up somewhere too. But there are some important differences between the environment that you guys work in and where I work. So you know what the cockpit environment is like. It's equipment, flight and engine instruments, radios, GPS, iPads these days, so tablets. I know a lot of pilots are using ForeFlight checklists, digital or not. The physical reality of it is it's very dynamic, it's noisy, may or may not be climate controlled, or climate controlled very well. And the bottom line is everything is at stake for you and your passengers. And the margin for error is usually slim. This is where that 98 AR or ASRS, the Aviation Safety Reporting System report, they looked at 34 different types of competing activities that distracted or preoccupied pilots. And they found that 90% of those fell into 4 broad categories. Communication, which is talking to us, head down work, searching for traffic, and responding to abnormal situations. They also talked about some strategies for reducing those vulnerabilities, and I'm curious if anybody in here has any specific strategies themselves, how they try to manage that, especially if you're by yourself.
Push the autopilot button.
Yeah.
Turn the radio off.
Turn the radio off?
Turn the radio off.
That works, yeah.
I think the best thing you can do is, and this sometimes is easier said than done, is be ahead of the airplane. So if you're not ahead of the airplane and you're in the environment, you got some real challenges.
Yeah, and they talked about that as one of the things to to think about. And what they said was, realize that conversation itself is a powerful distractor. It's hard to talk and do something else at the same time. Controllers are very aware of that.
One thing I do, Garrett, is if I have passengers who I don't fly with normally, is I brief them on a signal to get a quiet cockpit.
It's a good idea.
Okay, and that is, if I hold up my hand, everybody has to stop talking because I'm trying to deal with something.
And they may not hear what you're
Well,
hearing, or
I
even
don't-
understand it.
At that point, I don't care what they're doing as
Yeah.
long as they're quiet. But that's prearranged in the passenger briefing that we all do at the beginning of each flight.
Why is he laughing?
One of the stress points for me has always been readbacks, where I had to read back what you already said fast.
Yeah.
So I've selected a few that I run into more frequently than others, and I've written them out, and I have a piece of paper in front of me. So when you say, cleared for the ILS and the speech that you cleared, I have that right in front of me, and I just plug in the number, and I can read it and sound like I know what I'm doing. All I'm really doing is
Reading your script.
my script,
Yeah.
but I pick out 3 or 4 of those that I run into most often.
Yeah.
And so I don't sound like a fool to you.
Well, that's good. I mean, you're using the phraseology, is what you're doing, which
Yeah.
is what we do. We get the opportunity to use it every day, over and over and over again, so for pilots, it's for GA pilots especially, you don't get that opportunity as much, so that's perfect.
But part of that is being ahead of the airplane, and part of it is, and I'm not challenging John on this, but already knowing what they're going to tell you. You know what they're going to tell you.
Right.
At or above 2.5 until established, cleared for the ILS 20 approach. You already know exactly what you're going to hear. So having to plug that in may not necessarily be in yours or the controller's best interest of that. Already knowing what the limitations are going to be and what the controller's going to say.
Yeah, the risk of having it scripted like that is that you can sort of lead yourself down the wrong path sometimes, and you got caught off guard if we don't say what you're expecting us to say. So you have to think about it.
They don't sometimes.
Yeah, right. Sometimes we don't say it how we want to say it either. So yeah, trying to reschedule or schedule tasks and activities to minimize conflicts with communication, and especially different critical parts of your flight. Being proactive, pre-planning. When you have to perform 2 things at the same time, set up some sort of a scan so that you can avoid letting your attention wander on one thing or the other too long. And treat interruptions as red flags in your mind so that you can fend them off as well as possible. So I'll come back to this picture after I go to the list here, but because I think this is one of the rarities that I have of the actual position that we work. This is in the radar lab at Seattle Center, and that's me in front of the scope. And I'll code through some of that equipment and try to describe what's going on there. So for the typical center control room, again, the approach controls is going to be different. The towers are obviously very different, but anybody who's been in any facility knows there's a lot of equipment around. Controllers are trained to work as a team, and we both have shared responsibilities and definite tasking that we're given in order to maintain safety during periods of especially high workload. So 2 main positions that you'll see in a center environment is the radar controller, which we call the R side, which is the person on the radio. And then there's the radar associate, which we call the D side. And so if we go back, me on the right, that's the R side. Gentleman on the left is the D side. It's basically an assistant position. He's plugged in, he can hear what I'm hearing on the radios. He doesn't talk to the airplanes himself, but his primary purpose is to support the operation of the position by being a second set of eyes and ears, and he is solely dedicated to coordinating with other controllers on all the landline communication systems so that the radar controller can focus on talking to the airplanes and not have to interrupt himself to go coordinate with another controller, which happens quite often. Equipment, we have 3 different displays, radar, flight data, and touchscreen info. 2 different sets of keyboards and trackballs, so I have on the right keyboard and trackball that you can't quite see. He has a keyboard that you can kind of see, and then he has a trackball as well to manipulate what's on the flight data on the left there. So routes, altitude amendments, I mean, he can do anything from over there. He can amend anything in the flight plan, basically, EFR or IFR over there. Some flight strips in the middle.
You still use those here?
We still do at Seattle Center on the low altitude places where we provide approach control services. It's still a requirement for us to do that. Some centers don't have that requirement anymore, even on the low altitudes, but we still do. It's a good double check.
So that
and
display,
redundancy.
that monitor on the left is for the high altitude foot strips?
The high altitude strips, let's see. This monitor,
Yeah.
this is the, what we call the EDST, which is the en route data,
Oh, it's weather.
I can't remember what it stands for actually, but
Weather and that?
no, that's all flight data.
Oh, okay.
So we'll have, mouse been moving here. We will, usually in this window in the bottom, we'll have, for IFR proposals, there'll be a list of those there for our area, so that when somebody calls us on the ground or airborne and they're requesting their IFR, we look there to find your proposal. We'll also have a hard copy of it in the strip bay. And then above that is the active flight plans that include both IFR and VFR. And it can all be manipulated from both sides to a degree, both my keyboard and his keyboard, but it just allows us when the position is double teamed that we can both manipulate data at the same time and work together. He can also pre-plan sort of things. He can, if he sees a traffic conflict that I'm not seeing yet, he can just go and trial plan a route and see if that route will fix it, or trial plan a new altitude to see if that altitude will fix it. The machine will probe out and see if there's any other, if that would create another conflict, for instance, with airspace or traffic or whatever.
Are you verbally communicating these needs to each other?
Yes.
So do you have VFR flight plans in that stack there? Do they show up?
We don't, the ones you file with flight service, the ones that you're required to open and close, we
Right.
can't do that. We don't get that information from flight service. That's a good question, and I thought of that when I mentioned it, because I know that sometimes that some pilots believe
Well, I
that we
always
do.
wondered about that. I didn't think,
don't-
I thought there was a wall between flight service.
There is. We have a phone line, that's all we have.
I see. But yet, there've been times when the center comes back and obviously knows that I'm on, what my routing is. And so I always wondered how that happened. They weren't talking.
The only way, well, you're talking, when you first call them up, they know?
Well, I was going to Desert Air over in Eastern Washington, and they, so I filed Bander, Ellensburg, Phoebus, and then Desert Air, Mike 94, to get around the Yakima firing range.
Okay.
There's a restricted area there. So after I passed Ellensburg, the controller comes on and he says, you don't have to go to Phoebus. You can, as soon as you get across the river, you can turn right and head south to Desert Air. So I said, how the heck did he know I had filed for Phoebus, which is just an intersection, you know?
So when you said you filed, did you file an IFR?
No.
Okay.
VFR flight plan.
I don't know, I wouldn't know, he might be familiar with the route, he might just be able to tell kind of where you were going and anticipate, guess. That happens too, because we see, VFR specifically, we'll see them go, a lot of them will go on similar routes as they fly through different areas.
So if you're going flight following and you've got a dog leg in your plan, do you ask for the direct route, or do you actually tell the controller that you're gonna make a dog leg and put this waypoint out there in the middle someplace?
I would tell them.
You would?
I would. And I cover that later too, is because it helps us anticipate where you're gonna be going,
Mhm.
which helps us anticipate potential traffic that we might see, or weather that we know about. So that's important for us. If you're gonna stop and do some sightseeing somewhere or anything like that, because if your flight plan only says you're going to Palo Alto or wherever, we may not, you know, if we see traffic off your left side 5 miles, okay, no big deal, we're not gonna be worried about calling it, right? But then if you make a left turn and without us expecting it, then, oh, well, geez, I was going over there, so maybe it is an issue.
So-
So that's important for us to know.
So if the VFR flight plan is not in that stack, if you call and ask for flight following, that does wind up on the stack, does it?
Yes.
So that's a better system all around. I use flight following regardless of whether I file a flight plan.
Yeah, the only difference is, we'll put in your aircraft type, everything we need in order to track you and know where you're going and talk to you. The advantage of filing and opening and closing with flight service is that if you are overdue
Right.
and you don't close it, then we wouldn't necessarily know that.
Right.
Because if we terminate your services, then we don't know when you're planned on getting anywhere in particular, so.
So the flight strips, do you get one of those when you're on flight following? Or is that just for IFR?
We get, one gets generated, but we don't keep it. We're only required to have them for IFR operations it helps us maintain separation in the low altitude, especially when we're in areas, we still have areas where we don't have radar to the ground. So we have to use non-radar procedures, which requires us to use a strip in those one in, one out type situations. Yeah.
What percentage of your workload is professional pilots or airline, et cetera, and what percent is GA?
In the low altitude, so we have,
Yeah, well, obviously in the low altitude.
right, but so we have our stratified in our area. I don't know what the percentage would be, but we have 3 low altitude sectors, 23 and below, and we have 3 high altitude sectors, 24 and above. Obviously, all the high altitude sectors, all professional pilots for the most part. 23 and below, we get quite a bit of traffic, especially when the weather's nice and in the summertime, VFR traffic and IFR traffic, GA traffic so, I mean, there's a lot of corporate and airline traffic up high, but we get quite a bit of, I mean, I would say if I had to guess, it might be 30% GA for us. But it's just an slightly educated guess, I would say.
That'd be like VFR and IFR combined.
What's that?
That would be VFR and IFR combined.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I see plenty of VFR or GA pilots that are flying IFR, even when the weather's beautiful, and I totally recommend that if you can.
Now, we know that, flight following is obviously a workload based, whether we get there or not. I've never had it turned down, but, I mean, even yesterday I read online, somebody posted that, why would center bother with me as a little sky catcher, to call flight following? I mean, that's not the right attitude, correct?
Right. It's not optional for us, based on the way our rules are written. Unless we are just too busy to take another VFR for flight following, it's not optional service. So it really has to be justified in order to turn it down. And I've rarely seen it in the short time I've been there so far, and I've never outright denied someone flight following. I've told them to stand by for a few minutes because I had so many other things going on. It was just not possible for me to give them a code and identify them. Yeah, yeah.
I've done flight following where I would say, talk to you, and then we're done, and I will hear you talking to other planes back and forth, and then all of a sudden it goes silent. And it may be 10 minutes, and I hear nothing, and I'm wondering, have we lost contact or something? But is there something that all of a sudden you cut out all this other talk because we haven't talked for a certain number of minutes, or?
No.
What's happening there? Or is it really silent, that there's no talk?
It could be, but what usually happens, especially in my area and in the mountainous areas, we have same frequency, multiple transmitters and receivers that they've strategically placed in different places so that to increase the coverage as much as possible. So what will happen is, in my area specifically, on 124.85 in the Eureka, Arcata, Siskiyou County, Ashland, over to Crescent City area, you go to the Ashland side, and it's in the high mountain area. And so I have a transmitter over there, and you go to the arcade or the coastline side, and that's on the, that's 75, 80 miles away, and an elevation difference quite a bit. So I have to switch transmitters in order for this aircraft on the coast to hear me, versus I'm always receiving on all the transmitters, so that's why often, even if you check on and say something, and the controller says, you were stepped on or something like that, you may not know you were stepped on because you can't hear it, where I can hear it, because I'm hearing it over here and over here. So I change transmitters so that I can talk to you, and then I change transmitters to talk to the other pilot over here. And so when I change transmitters, I think it's very likely that what happens is I've had a lot of pilots who, when I do that, I'm talking to this one, I change to go over to talk to the other one, say something to him, and this one immediately almost comes up and says, hey, radio check. Right? Because he's wondering why it's all scratchy now. He can't hear, that's because I changed transmitters. So, but it also does happen that sometimes VFR, we get busy, you move through an area where we should have given you a new frequency for coverage, and we were too busy to do it or forgot or whatever happened. And so then it does happen where you can't hear us, and you try to call and you can't hear us. And in that case, I recommend just go to the AFD, or whatever your resource is for finding frequencies, and make sure you're on the right frequency still. Or go back to the previous frequency you were on and try that, or even calling the line to another airplane to see if somebody else can hear you and go that route. But the AFD is where I recommend to look. Yeah. Sorry.
A couple of things. One is for VFR flight following, and the only information you really get is from the pilot as far as where
Yeah.
he's going and what he's got.
Right.
Okay. How much information is passed on, say if you go to the next sector or you get passed on to approach control? Do they get some information from you, or do you have to tell them everything again?
No, they get everything that, if we do an automated handoff, they get everything that you gave us. So you should only have to give it to one controller once. The only caveat I can think of is we don't have flight data with some towers, smaller towers, so that connection isn't there. So if we terminate you and you go over to them, then they're not going to know who you are. So yeah.
So do controllers work the same general areas so that you're familiar with the unique characteristics of an area? So a pilot that might fly into an area that they're not familiar with, you have you're familiar with and have knowledge of conditions and characteristics of that area that you deal with every day that you go to work?
Yes. Yeah.
And so yours is down in southern Oregon, northern California, it sounds like.
Eugene, Medford, coastline to south, yeah. Just to, the boundary with Oakland Center along the I-5 corridor is right at Mount Shasta.
Thank you.
So we talked about the equipment. The physical realities of it are quite different than what you have to experience being in the cockpit. When we're in a 24/7 secured facility, it's climate controlled, it's usually quiet. There's really zero risk of physical harm to us. We're especially if things go badly for you. I mean, we don't. It's not bad for us. Emotionally, it's bad, right? But in general, it's a pretty comfortable place. So I think that's important to remember too. And this is, I think, how sometimes controllers forget the environment that controllers or that pilots are in, because they are so comfortable. So distractions and interruptions for us include frequency congestion. We talked about that a little bit. Overlap, people getting stepped on when they may not even realize they're stepping on someone else, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. It just happens when it gets busy. Readback and hearback errors are big ones for us. We try to be diligent on that, but when you're busy, it can be tough. Landline coordination with other controllers, and then conversations in the room. There's always conversations in the room. You may or may not have heard some of them in the background before, but it's, unless everyone is busy at the same time, it's usually pretty constant. So common misconceptions from this 2004 report titled The Other End of the Radio, Identifying and Overcoming Common Pilot Controller Misconceptions. I tried to sort of summarize some of the biggest issues that it brought up. They've surveyed both pilots and controllers for this. From a controller perspective, things that controllers wished pilots understood about what air traffic does. Number one, we can be busy even if it doesn't sound like we're busy. Coordinating with other controllers on a different frequency when you may not hear us. Concepts of airspace, coordination and separation requirements that we have. We have a lot of rules, and there's a lot of things that we can and can't do sometimes that sometimes may not make sense. Radar limitations, not only coverage, but what we actually physically see on the scope. Ground speed, position, and altitude is really what we see. And then frequency and radio limitations, kind of the same, in the same vein as the first one there. Busy, we won't sound like it, but radio limitations as far as line of sight coverage as well. Usually, because controllers are specific to their area, and after a period of time, they know it very well. They know the blind spots, both radar and radio. So if they see you going towards one of them, they'll try to, usually if they can, try to give you a heads up so that either you can decide to maybe climb a little bit if you don't want to lose us, or we'll tell you it's just temporary and we'll pick you up again on the other side in 5 minutes or something like that. So that's quite common, especially in the mountainous areas. From the pilot perspective, things that they said that they found that pilots wanted controllers to know, and understanding of aircraft performance characteristics, understanding that workload varies during different phases of flight. Pilots don't intentionally miss radio calls. There was one quote in there that said, if we miss a radio call, assuming you can hear it, then it's not because it's because we're busy with something, is usually what it is. And controllers are more patient than others as far as waiting for a response. Abrupt route changes can be problematic if we just lay a 2-sentence route on you, then that's not easy, unless we give you a heads up. And then automation can be cumbersome. I know that the autopilot gets used quite a bit, but even that can be cumbersome at times, from my experience, what I've seen.
Along those lines, Garrett, one of the things I've noticed lately is, well, not even lately, but the last maybe 10 years or so, how much do the controllers get an appreciation of how much work is involved in a clearance change to reprogram the whole GPS system?
No, I think some of them do. And that's one thing that I try to reiterate when I'm training someone new, is that there's a lot involved depending on the system.
You sit there in your living room doing all the programming and the flight planning and all the rest of that, get it in there, it's all laid out, and you get it cleared as filed.
Right.
You're on your way, you get about halfway, and that guy says, there's no way I'm gonna give you that clearance. You're gonna have to go a different way.
Yeah.
All right, so, which is okay, but remember, it's gonna take 5 or 6 minutes to reprogram that, and the airplane doesn't stop.
Right.
And sometimes you get it midair,
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about, is the ones, you should stand by for a modification of requirements or whatever the
Right.
phraseology is.
And then they get upset when you haven't started your turn already.
Almost to the point where I would like to get it into their head is that, do you need a vector while you reprogram your GPS? Just to sort of get an idea or a feeling that, yeah, I know this is gonna be something that's gonna take you some time to do, and let's do it safely. What do you need from me to help you with that?
Yeah.
And so, down in the LA basin, coming hot and heavy. And in IMC, your jet's going over the top of me, and he said, okay, now I need you to do this, and I said, what? Where? I've never heard of that.
Right.
So I don't even know where it is, let alone what airway it's on. So I'm looking up all this stuff and reprogramming, and So how much of an appreciation do they get, or is it something that may be something that would be useful to give them an appreciation of there's a lot of work involved?
Yeah, it is, I see some who understand that, and I see some who don't. The FAA doesn't do a very good job of showing controllers what it's really like to be in the cockpit and when things like that happen, so.
And not everybody has a flight director that can help them with genre
Yeah.
flying,
So I try to do what you're saying, you know. If I need you to go on a new route because if it's for traffic that I need you to go now, then you have to, trainees don't realize that. Again, they come from the lab and when they do it in the lab, the remote pilot can just tap the new route and off it goes.
Yeah.
It's not that easy. So they'll lay, the guy will be 3 minutes from a holding fix. Not been told that he's gonna have to hold. And they lay a holding clearance on the guy and then get upset when he sort of fumbles around and it's like, well, wait a minute, So I try to make that clear to people that I work with that there's a reasonable expectation of what does and doesn't work and try to relay that, so. And it's good, I'm glad you brought it up because it reinforces it with me that it's a good thing to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, same thing, I agree with that, and there are times that I've been given vectors when they give me a new heading or a new place to go. Well, they realize they have to program something, or I ask them for one.
Yeah.
That helps. I've got a lot of cooperation on that.
Yeah.
Another thing you need to realize though is that, it's different, of course, usually dealing with a single pilot IFR or something than a professional flight crew or somebody with a co-pilot.
Yeah.
Because first got to fly the airplane and that's some basic.
Right, and before you put it in, you gotta figure out where it is and how.
So it's gonna take a little longer with a single guy up there, a single person on the clouds than with a.
Especially if he doesn't have an autopilot.
Yeah, especially if it's night and IMC and you have bad turbulence, that part is really,
So
it's the opposite of what you described as your environment.
Yeah, right, exactly. That's why I bring it up, yeah. So you said something really good, which was you asked for the vector.
Yeah.
I can't reiterate that enough. If you need something from us to help you in any situation,
Would you give me a vector while I reprogram my
Right.
GPS?
Exactly.
Something like that.
Just ask for
Well, I
it.
do it.
That's the best thing to do. Sure that, yeah, I covered everything. All right, so we're on to the practical tips and advice that I have. So, so I've only got a few slides left, really, that covers the practical advice and tips that I have. I talked to both other controllers and in other discussions I've had with pilots before this and controllers who are pilots, like my friend Matt, who's a CFII. So in general, I mentioned this before, but trust but verify. If you have a question or something doesn't seem right, speak up. Was that a right or a left downwind for runway 13 right? Controllers make mistakes too, and hear back and read back errors are common. If you hear another pilot give an incorrect readback and you don't hear the controller catch it, I would really encourage you to speak up because you might save someone.
What would you say in that situation, as the pilot who overheard this? What would be the correct way to?
Sort of a plain language transmission, say, hey, center, this is 123 Alpha Bravo. I think that call sign might have got something incorrect. I think he read back 12,000 instead of 11,000 or whatever the case may be. Really just plain language is the best in that scenario.
Okay.
Speaking of that trust but verify, if something ever comes up in your flight and you have a more detailed question you wanna ask someone about what happened or the procedure, or you have some feedback about your handling specifically, ask the controller for a phone number. I don't know how scary that is as a pilot, to ask for a phone number to call the FAA. Before I was working for the FAA, I would have said it's pretty darn scary. So, but you can call in, you don't have to give your name or anything, there's no requirement for that. So if you just have a question, you can ask. If you want someone to dig into it a little more carefully, we do have some really good managers who will take a close look at it and pull the tapes if they need and things like that, so. Keep us informed. So, you know, if you have any concerns or if there's a developing situation that you're dealing with, if it's weather or icing or equipment or fuel status or any one of those things or anything else, don't hesitate to tell us what's going on and give us a heads up. You know, it's our job to help you, and just like pilots, we hate surprises. So the earlier you tell us, the better. And with that being said, never, if you do start telling us something, don't always assume that we understand the implications of what you're telling us. Kind of goes to that, controllers don't always understand what the pilots are dealing with, and tell us what you need is where that leads to. You know, you're the pilot in command, so if you need something, just tell us. I have an example of that. I just read or saw an accident investigation video. So AOPA has a YouTube website, which I just discovered the other day, and Air Safety Institute. They have some short videos, some of them are really, really well done, that look at accidents. And the one that I saw that speaks to this, tell us what you need and keep us informed, is from December of 2012. There was in North Carolina, the retired commander of the Walter Reed Medical Center from DC. He died when he lost control of his Piper Cherokee in IMC conditions after he had a vacuum system failure. The video shows the communications that he had and the radar track, and he was being vectored for an ILS, was initially above the cloud deck, was vectored into the, as he started on the approach, went into the clouds, then realized he had, at some point, the vacuum failure. His gyros were not working, and initially didn't say anything to the controller. Was cleared for the approach, everything looked good, went over to the tower frequency. The approach controller, after he switched him, noticed that the pilot was drifting off course, off the localizer, and off altitude, and called the tower to say, hey, you need to find out what's going on with this guy. And after going back and forth for a couple minutes, they decided to finally give him a runway heading assignment and a climb to 3,000 or something. And he made his way back up, and then mentioned to the controller at that point that I think his words were something like, my gyros are not working. And because the controller asked him, are you having trouble maintaining headings or altitudes? So he mentioned this, but he didn't stress, he sort of nonchalantly mentioned this in the tape. That's what it sounds like. And so the controller, not having pilot experience, didn't really understand what that meant to him and how serious that was for an instrument pilot in IMC. So they vectored him around. He wasn't able to even fly the missed approach procedure properly. Vectored him around. He ended up they tried to keep him, to get him back on course, back towards the localizer, and he ended up doing a few 360s and not being able to hold altitude, and eventually climbed him up to an altitude where he broke out VFR, didn't tell the pilot, or didn't tell the controller, but he was in visual conditions, and so as the controller re-vectored him around, the controller could see that he was finally holding his headings and his altitudes again, but it was because he was VMC, not because he had not because his gyros came back. So then they vectored him back in. Everything started to look better, and again, the pilot didn't reiterate that this was an issue, and went over to the tower frequency again. He ended up in a right spiraling turn and crashed. So So that's a good example of what it means to just really tell us what you need, because we may not understand.
The pilot himself can give you, I cannot comply with your directions, ask for an alternate.
Absolutely.
Definitely, don't be afraid to say, I cannot do what you're asking me to
Didn't they, in that same video, didn't they kind of talk about him going to an alternate, but it
He
didn't
did,
really
his
happen?
alternate was Viapar.
Right.
Only 20 miles away or something. And they did talk about it while he was out
But
there.
at the same
circles.
thing, they didn't stress that that was an emergency or.
Right. The controller didn't realize it and said, well, I can do this, I can give you another vector if you want. So he kind of talked themselves into it, unfortunately.
Well, I see that call that he made in two different ways. One is my gyros aren't working, you might relate that to the aircraft. The other is his head.
Yeah, he was alone too, so
Yeah.
maybe that was a factor. So that's important. The next one is don't rush your transmissions. And I know this sounds funny coming from a controller, but be deliberate and enunciate. It seems counterintuitive, I was trained this way as a controller, and I always try to make it very clear to my trainees that when workload increases, it is really important to consciously slow down your speech rate in order to reduce errors, and on both sides of the microphone. And it takes practice, but it is really effective. I will say that I wish more controllers understood that. I see a lot of my colleagues speaking way too quickly, chunking too many numbers when they're giving instructions, or sometimes even mumbling to controllers or to pilots, even when they're not necessarily busy. And then they get upset when a pilot asks them to say again or misses a call or something like that. That bothers me as a controller to see other pilots or other controllers do that, because it just doesn't make sense to me. When a controller begins to feel busy, I think similar to how pilots, when they feel busy, you sort of get amped up, and it's hard to be more conscious of that. Your mind is kind of racing, and it's a physical response. So when a controller begins to feel busy, whether or not they are, it's relative to personality and experience level, and they start getting behind the power curve, it's natural for them to want to hurry up to try to catch up again, and it's human. So it's still interesting to me though that sometimes, because when they're not busy, and I see them not being that busy, and they still are sort of rattling things off, and I do it too sometimes. It's just, we do it every day. We give these clearances all day long, and we're just trying to move along. And sometimes we just forget that there's no need to go that fast sometimes. So proper phraseology is crucial. However, plain language is definitely necessary at times. To me, this is really a function of the proper phraseology part of radio proficiency. For professional pilots, it's something they do every day as well. They're used to it. It's easier for them. Maybe not as much for GA pilots who don't fly as much or have as many hours. And controllers talk for a living. We do it all the time. So, but we all recognize that sometimes plain language is definitely necessary in order to get your message across. So don't be afraid to do that. Like you said, if you hear something that doesn't sound right, try not to get too tied up in how you're going to say something. Just make sure you tell them what you need to tell them.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Gone to the Puyallup Aviation Show every year, and I spent hours talking to controllers, and they've given me this advice, but I don't follow it, because in practice it doesn't seem like it's what they really want. I use flight following almost all the time, and if I call, and what they've said is, you just give us a data dump, my airplane type and where I am and where I'm going and the altitude I'm at or climbing to or whatever. And I find that if I do that, they'll ask me, they're busy, they're doing a lot of stuff, I know, and so they almost always ask me to repeat. So mostly I just say RV 737 Golf request, That gets me into their queue.
Yeah,
If they're talking a bunch of other, and then when they come back to me, then I can give them the data dump.
yeah.
Which is it, really?
Or something in between.
It's something in between, I think, yeah. You're right, I mean, sometimes we're busy and everyone wants to keep things moving. But if you have to repeat yourself, then it's only making things worse, right? So, it is a balance, yeah. That's why I think it takes practice, because it's just a matter of getting used to effectively doing it, I think, so.
Well, let's be a little bit more specific here. In your view, what's the best initial call for flight following?
I have that on the next slide, actually.
I'm a straight man.
One of the things I'm getting at is, when I call you, I want to give you the information you need as expeditiously as possible.
Yeah.
And just look what you're looking for. So
Yeah.
this critical or crucial phraseology, exactly what phrases are you looking for? Are you going to give us a list?
I've got it.
Let's go to the next slide.
So this is for flight following. There's nothing written about how you should request flight following or the best way to do it. This is, from my experience, what works best for me. And I've seen it work for other controllers too that I work with. For me, the best thing you can do is, especially if you don't know how busy I am, keep your initial call up short and sweet. So Seattle Center, Skyline 123 Alpha Bravo, requesting flight following, or with a request. And then my response is going to vary based on what I'm doing and how busy I am, or what I'm in the middle of. Skyline 123 Alpha Bravo, Seattle Center, squawk 6417, go ahead. And we'll talk about what we want after the next slide. Or Seattle Center, say position and altitude. The reason I may say that versus go ahead is, if I hear you and let's say that the transmission doesn't sound very clear, so I'm suspecting that you're further away from my particular airspace than I can really help you with, I'm going to ask that first to get an idea of where you are. Because sometimes you're in the next sector's, or the next area's frequency in their airspace. And so I can give you a code and identify you and all that, but then the problem is I'm putting work on the other controller, and I don't know if he is busy. I have to give it, it's his choice whether to provide flight following at that point. I can't put that work on him. So I have to make sure that I know where you are first sometimes. Which is another reason, if we give you a squawk code and then we identify you, and then we realize you're in someone else's airspace, we'll try to coordinate if we can and say, you know, is this okay? He's going your direction, he's coming my direction, wherever the case may be. And they'll accept the coordination. If they say no, if the coordination is he's going towards you and I need to put him on your frequency, they may say, well, I'm too busy right now, or just terminate his services and have him call me up in 5 minutes or something like that. So that's what might be going on sometimes.
Question, what kind of DMR pilot, you call it, you want a location, altitude, you just read it, what's the best kind of location to give you?
The best locations are based off of nav aids or public airports. Private airports, we have them displayed on our, we have a little button we can push for emergency airports. It shows us every strip that's out there. But normally we're not looking at that, and we're not familiar with all of them all the time anyway, because there are so many of them, dirt strips here and whatnot. So yeah, nav aids are really helpful. I'm 50 miles south of Olympia or Olympia Vortac or whatever the case may be. Major landmarks or can be helpful. It depends on the area. I can speak to my area only. In our area, Crater Lake, we actually have Crater Lake depicted on our radar map, so we know where it is. We have Mount Shasta, Mount Thielsen, Mount McLaughlin. We have the Sisters, Mount Bachelor, all depicted. So I can see all that.
Well, it sounds like if we have one extra data point in there saying Seattle Center, Skyline 123 Alpha Bravo, 4 miles southwest of Payne Field, requesting flight following, that gives you all you need to do to evaluate what you can do and what you need to do before you ask me about it, so we keep it off the frequency. Wouldn't that be better?
It would. It works well too. I have this suggestion this way because if you do tune up the frequency and you feel like we're really busy, it sounds like we're really busy, and you want to just interject real quick and get your message. Keeping it short and sweet in that sense is what works best, I think. But that's really good too, and I have pilots that do that, and it's if I'm paying, I'm not busy with something at the moment, and I have my attention at that moment, and I hear all that, I get it in the system right away. Yeah, then I pretty much have everything I need already. So that works really well.
Because you know what my altitude is, because I'm already squawking that.
Yes, but I need to verify it.
Well, you can verify it, but you
Yeah.
can do that at your leisure as opposed to knowing where I am and if you can deal with me.
Yeah.
So the answer is if it doesn't sound like you're super busy, add the position,
I would say
but not a lot of other stuff.
position and altitude.
And altitude at that point.
Yeah.
Okay. And destination?
No. I would leave that out if you can.
Their email address.
Because again, then you're throwing a lot of numbers at us, and it's hard for us to, then we might lose the first two if we hear, that happens a lot.
Okay. Just wanted to see what the other end of that was.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I might also say standby, I mentioned that earlier, if I'm really busy, or call me back in 5 minutes. So, just like we were just talking about now, what do we need to really identify you and give you those, provide advisories? Position, altitude, aircraft type, and equipment suffix, which if you give it when you initial call up with the Skylane call sign, and we have that. Your altitude, we do need to verify your mode C at some point. Again, if you don't give it initially, we'll ask you at some point. And your destination. Other things to think about, if you're going to be taking some indirect routing, sightseeing, just give us a heads up, let us know. If you're going to follow the coastline, take a look at Mount St. Helens or something like that, just let us know. It helps us anticipate your actions in terms of calling traffic, if it's potential, or letting you know about weather that might be an issue.
Yeah. When you're going to tell us about other aircraft, what altitude band around our altitude do you even worry about? Within 1,000 feet or within?
Depends on the situation. If you are, so say I'm working two VFR aircraft, talking to both of them, and one's northbound at 8,500 feet and one's southbound at 9,500 feet, and they're going to go right over each other, right underneath each other. I have a requirement if it's within 1,000 feet to actually call the traffic. Whether or not, assuming you guys are going to stay level, it's not going to be an issue. So I have that requirement. I have that requirement for IFR aircraft too, within 1,000 feet to call the traffic. It's just a heads up so you don't get surprised and see an airplane right there. But that being said, if I'm flight following you, and I see another aircraft that's, whether I'm working in or not, that's slowly descending or climbing, and the targets are going to be close or merge, then I'm going to definitely tell you, because I don't always know if you're going to start climbing or descending. And so sometimes controllers will fend things off a little bit and give you an early traffic call, because either they're trying to prioritize things. They know that, well, I'm going to be busy with this over here. I want to make sure I get this traffic call in now rather than later, so I don't have to do some panic move. So that's common. So it just depends on the situation. That makes me think about something I've been asked before. When people, our pilots ask, do you want us to tell you when we're about to change altitudes? It's not a requirement unless we've restricted you. In the center environment, we don't generally restrict VFR pilots' altitudes, unlike Class Bravo and stuff. But it is helpful. if we're really busy, most controllers are probably just gonna, might be a little annoyed by it sometimes, but, to be honest, but that's too bad. I mean, I don't look at it that way, you know what I mean? I'd rather know what you're doing than not.
So if somebody's gonna do a high-speed climb,
Yeah,
it wouldn't hurt to let you know ahead of time.
yeah, because if you're 10 miles away from a target that's at 17.5 and you call me up and you're at 8.5, and I don't know you're gonna do that, I'm not even gonna think about calling that traffic. We do have a requirement to call traffic, because traffic that we're not working, that's unverified mode C. We've seen mode Cs that are off by several thousand feet before on aircraft that we're talking to. There's an error or whatever. So if we see targets that are going to merge, we're going to call the traffic no matter what to make sure that you're looking for it. So that's only aircraft. So if we're working you and then somebody else is that we're not talking to, we just see the target. We don't have that verified mode C, so we will. If they're going to merge, we're going to call that.
Question?
Yeah.
When we have VFR flight following, are you required to tell us about the traffic within that box you talked about? Is that a requirement on you?
The 1,000 foot.
Yeah.
It is if workload permits in that case. I mean, we miss those traffic calls as far as like 1,000 feet going by. We know you're going to miss. Yeah, those calls get missed from time to time based on workload.
If we see traffic even close to us, should we tell you? Wow. No.
Depends on how close it was. If you feel like it was a little close and maybe we should have called it, then I would call them out.
Garrett?
Yeah.
This is probably gonna seem like an odd question, but, and I'll narrow it down just a little bit, but why would somebody even ask for flight following? What's the purpose of asking for flight following?
Well, I can give you lots of examples
Good.
for why.
Good.
Just yesterday, I worked yesterday, and it was a nice, yesterday was nice down in my area too. The weather was nice, so a lot of VFR traffic. Friday through Sunday, we see that little, influx. So in the Roseburg area, I had an aircraft that was coming in from the east. It was a Cheyenne, I think it was. Or Twin Cessna, that's what it was. Twin Cessna coming in, he was at 16.5 when he called me up 20 miles prior. Identify him, he was going to Roseburg. And I'm only working maybe 5 or 6 airplanes at this point, several of them off VFR. And then I have another aircraft coming down from Eugene towards Roseburg as well, overflying Roseburg, going to Medford, at 9,500, a Bonanza. And these guys are the only 2 airplanes within 100 miles of each other. But somehow they managed to go right over each other. And so, and I'm talking to both of them. And so, about 10, 15 miles out, I try not to call traffic, GA traffic, more than that, because it's pretty much possible to see anybody more than 10 miles out anyway. So, 10 or 15 miles out, I could see the Roseburg traffic, 16.5, he started a slow descent. And I don't know at what point he's going to go through that 9,500s. I could just see they're going to go right over each other. So I called the traffic, and he didn't see him. The first time I called, neither of them saw each other. And the one pilot actually mentioned to me, yeah, the visibility was pretty hazy. He couldn't see, he didn't say how far away. So eventually they were within about 5 miles of each other again, going to go right over at top. The landing traffic was at 11.5 still descending. We called the traffic again, and he didn't have it in sight. So I said, maintain VFR at above 10,000 until it buys. I'll call it, I'll let you know when you pass the traffic. I told the Bonanza pilot to stay at his altitude or below. And they went right over each other, 500 feet. So they said, yeah, thanks for...
Never saw each other.
They did, not until they were going right over top. So it's amazing, you see that all the time. I mean, these guys weren't even going, following the same corridor. They were just crossing traffic. It happens more than you think.
So in a non-instruments or in a VMC type environment, which both of those were flying in. What you're saying is, because when Steve asked you the question about are you required to call out traffic, and if you say workload permitting,
Well,
then
we're required to make sure airplanes don't run into each other.
okay.
So in that
And that's why I said it,
Yeah.
and drilled down a little bit further, because it's, if it doesn't provide ultimately, like an instrument condition, instrument environment, if it doesn't provide it, then say, all right, well then, what would be the purpose of that? Because flight following in the old days, prior to our gee whiz stuff, was, make sure I'm kind of going the right direction here. Flight following in today's world is more for, I would say, than traffic separation or some of these traffic alerts. Is that safe?
Yeah, I mean, traffic.
I think the main function of flight following is to have him, a mic, push away if something happens. Even if I'm on a VFR flight plan, so they don't call out the CAP, plus I didn't show up 3 hours from now at some strip or other. If I have a problem, bang, you know?
Okay.
And that's another
He knows
reason
who
we
I am,
know-
where I am, and the whole 9 yards, and I say, my engine just quit, you know?
Bob's comment was sort of maybe another layer of my question as to if a person was on flight following, and if the weather just turned to junk and you needed to get into the instrument system, it would in fact make it easier then to get into the instrument system, because you're already working me as a visual target.
Yeah.
And I say unable to maintain VFR, like to do this or that, right? Easier,
Right.
because you've already got data on it.
Exactly.
Right? Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
And that happens a lot too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question. If we all of a sudden out of the blue just ask for a pop-up IFR clearance,
Yeah.
how much workload is it from your point of view? I know it's obviously more workload than if I filed, but how much more, what's the hassle?
If there's no traffic, it's really not that much of a workload, or it's really nothing.
It's more if you're handling other traffic.
It's, if there's other traffic, if there's other IFR traffic in the area that's gonna prevent me from issuing that clearance right away. Because if I do, immediately I lose separation. So that's the situation.
That's why you say maintain your own terrain clearance.
Actually, I was gonna talk about that too. That's different.
Oh.
Because sometimes we'll do that even if there's no traffic. It's a liability thing that the FAA has gotten into. Since I've been in 2010, it's been there. I don't know when it started, but I was gonna talk a little bit more about that too. Yeah.
Usually when I'm flying with flight following, the only time they call me, air traffic control calls me and says there's an airplane at such and such, altitude unknown. And I hear this most of the time. And I'm looking all around and I rarely see it. And that's a little disconcerting sometimes. And then they'll tell me no longer a factor. But I many times never see it when they say I don't know. And you can't tell radar-wise, they don't know unless they've got a altitude encoding transponder.
Right.
You don't see it, you can't tell it.
No. We see, yeah, if they don't have a transponder or if it's not on, then we will potentially see a primary target, which is just the pure reflection of the radar. And so it's just giving us range and azimuth is all it is, so we won't see altitude in those cases. And there are a lot of nuisance primary targets in some places. At Klamath Falls, for instance, the radar site is about 10 miles southwest of the airport, up on a hill. A lot of these radar sites are up on hills or mountaintops, to give better coverage. And at Klamath Falls, I think it's Highway 97 that runs through that area. We see cars on the freeway, and they'll bounce around because we pick one up and lose one, and pick one up and lose one. And based on the weather conditions and the propagation of the radar, and if there's temperature inversion, all sorts of things that I don't even understand, affects what gets bounced back and what doesn't sometimes. So sometimes it's worse than others. So that's an issue. And so yeah, if we're calling a target that's altitude unknown, it's because it's a primary target and it looks like an airplane. So we just wanna make sure you're looking out the window to make sure you don't run into something.
If I get one of those and I say I see them, oftentimes, controller will ask me, you know, who and how, I'll say Cherokee 2000 below northbound. So like he puts that in his system, or in his head.
Or tell me what type it was and altitude it was.
That happens to me all the time.
And we do that with unverified mode C targets as well, because if we see somebody who's kind of been, in somebody's, if he's been in your way, likely he's gonna get someone else's way at some point too. So if you see him, you verify that he's about 2,000 feet below you, then you tell me, then that verifies the mode C point, roughly. Yeah.
Just show appreciation of air traffic control. Several years ago, I was flying up, my wife and I flying up to Friday Harbor. And VFR, beautiful day out. I did not file a flight plan, but I was in contact with the island because I was going to go across the Mola there. And all of a sudden they called me back, Cessna 722 Tango Mike, 747 at 5 o'clock, he has you in sight. I turned around and looked, and he filled up the whole window. A good 1,000 feet above me, but not much more than that. And I was flying underneath him, and I figured it's going to be turbulence like crazy. Well, that 182 is handled whatever it was not rough at all. But I think he was making a letdown into Victoria, where he was going.
Oh, yeah.
But that was real experience. Look back and see the big 47. Well, I'm glad he had me in sight, because I would have seen him eventually. It was an experience.
A dry run.
Splatting on the windshield.
Yeah, it's very important, and I'm glad. It sounds like everyone here is. I don't know if there's anyone here that's still afraid to get flight following for whatever reason, maybe a bad experience, but if that's the case, I definitely recommend that you.
Garrett, do you still use the SkySpotter program for PIREPs on the flight conditions? Do you know about the SkySpotter
I've
program?
heard of the NOAA program for.
No, it's AOPA's SkySpotter program.
No, I haven't heard of that one.
Okay. Where you just say, I'm SkySpotter, and so you give a specific sequence of flight conditions.
Oh, no, I haven't. Do you usually relay those through flight service?
Mostly through flight service, but you can, if it's not busy,
Yeah.
it's easier to do it through center.
If you see anything significant weather-wise while you're flying, even VFR, we definitely want to know about it. Even if you think someone else already.
Or the reverse,
think we already do.
the conditions are better than the worst forecast.
That's true, if they're improving, yeah. Last summer, we had a lot of smoke from forest fires in my area. A lot of TFRs involved with that. And normally, a common VFR route from the valley in California going north or south into Oregon and into towards Washington, they come through the I-5 corridor there, past just west of Mount Shasta. The visibility was so bad, the tops of the smoke were 15,000, 16,000 feet, and the flight visibility was lower than 3 miles in places, so we saw guys going all the way around. So I know for a fact that reports like that, give people a heads up about stuff like that.
Well, I know we're pretty much at the end of the official program, but Garrett says he'll be happy to stay around for as long as the questions
I got nothing to do.
are coming. Maybe you can, when you talk to some of your associates, what are some of your pet peeves, things that we that we do that we shouldn't be doing?
I kind of skipped over a couple things that are important to keep in mind back here. Always ask before leaving the frequency. That's one, especially, IFR pilots are not going to normally do that, but VFR, it does happen once in a while. And controllers get really, really upset when that happens, because if we try to call traffic to you and then you're not answering, then it's emotional for us to have to go through that, It's scary for us, so.
On the same, when you do give us, terminate radar services, squawk VFR, what's a good short response? Because, you obviously, we're done talking, right? I don't need to read all that back to you. Is it just Roger?
Yeah, you can just say, Roger, have a good day. That works.
How about leaving a tower? You're launching out of a tower, I'm headed northbound, they know that you're leaving town. And I hear I'm clear of your airspace northbound, I've heard controllers say, and then we're talking about tower controllers, I don't want to hear from you. I know you're leaving town. And the other ones, what you're saying is, before you leave the frequency, talk to me. Well, what do
Yeah,
you
tell me,
think?
tell me you need to say, I need to leave the frequency for a minute, you don't have to tell me why.
No, I'm talking about, I'm out of your airspace, I'm VFR. VFR, leaving your airspace, do you want to hear that I'm leaving your airspace?
In the
From-
center,
From a tower standpoint.
from a tower standpoint, I can't really speak to that,
Okay.
since I don't have that experience working
Because
as a tower.
they know you are anyway.
I think it depends on where you are. I was in Payne Field a week or so ago, and we left VFR, and I said, okay, I want to depart to the southwest. And he said, okay, fine, left turn, monitor this frequency, monitor me on this frequency. And that was it. He just said, listen, and he didn't say change frequency, he just said monitor my frequency.
But did you wait to get out of the class Charlie or Delta, whatever it is there, before you switched frequencies? Or did you tell him you were switching frequencies?
No, I didn't tell him. I waited till I was halfway back to Brampton before.
Yeah.
Because that's what you're talking about, is it
Well,
let
as
people
far
know?
as the way, like I said, I don't have any specific tower experience, but my understanding of the regulations is that if you're in, as long as you're still in class Delta or class Charlie, you should still be monitoring, at least monitoring that frequency. Once you're clear, you're free of that regulation to be monitoring, to be in contact with ATC, right? So you're free to go wherever you want, whether or not we tell you one or the other.
But if you're flying out of Tacoma to here, we don't ever tell Tacoma goodbye or anything like that, we just quit talking.
Yeah, right. I think most cases they're not gonna care. The only cases they might care is if they do have known traffic that they're gonna wanna tell you about before, and then maybe they just haven't had a chance yet to, and they wanna make sure you don't change frequencies. In the center environment, we have defined boundaries, just like the tower does, but
Different program.
a different program, yeah.
So if any of you guys ever fly to Renton, they actually tell you, no traffic between you and their, have a good flight.
Yes.
It kind of tells you that you live in their
Yes.
airspace.
Yeah.
Which I haven't heard that anywhere else.
Inbounds too, like, cancel flight following, and the guy says squawk VFR, et cetera. No traffic observed between you and Fort Townsend, which is really nice.
That's a technique that some controllers use, yeah. I use that.
And no traffic observed means
Right.
no traffic observed.
Right.
Radar, it doesn't mean, yeah, exactly, right, it's a good point.
I fly a craft that's invisible to radar. And just to let you know they're out there.
Yeah.
So if you think flight following gives you the opportunity to go heads down a little bit more often,
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
about,
it's a good point.
what about reporting your altitude? I've heard it lots of different ways. Some people say 4,500, some people say 4.5. Do you care?
I really, not really, as long as I understand, as long as it's coming out clearly.
So that's acceptable either way?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of controllers are they're not gonna correct you in phraseology necessarily. If they have to, if you're doing that and you find controllers are having trouble understanding you, then maybe you should defer to being more standard about it.
Doesn't the information manual give us guidance on that? And don't they say 4,500?
They do, yeah.
Rather than 4.5?
Right.
That's why I was asking, because it seems like nobody's paying attention to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if as long as the controllers don't care, then who cares?
And the question about leaving the tower frequency, out of my airplane's based at Tacoma, and they will give you flight following for a certain distance. So I always tell them bye-bye when I'm changing frequencies.
Do they give you a squawk code then?
No, they'll just, give you flight following for a certain period of time, and then it'll be my habit to tell them bye-bye, I'm changing frequencies.
Yeah. It never hurts to just tell them if you're going to, yeah.
What kind of planes around here do we, can't be seen by radar?
weight shift control had very little carriage, small Rotax engine and a hang glider wing, and there's not enough metal reflection, and no transponder.
But any composite airplane is minimal visibility of radar.
Talking about the plastic airplane?
Plastic,
Yeah.
I fly
plastic airplane, yeah, plastic airplanes.
very regularly to Salem IFR. And I've changed the way that my approach, and I'll tell you what I'm talking about here in a minute, but I went down Wednesday, I'm in IMC, and when I broke out IMC, they got me on the descent, and broke out IMC, I said, Salem in sight, this is cleared for the visual approach to Salem contact tower. In the past, some years ago, I used to say, Salem Tower, Benz 1000 Tango, inbound. I said, where are you? Wait a minute, what do you mean, where am I? So, on Wednesday when I flew down, I've done this differently, and tell me if I'm right or wrong, it was Salem Tower, Bonanza 1000 Tango, just handoff from Seattle Center inbound. And immediately they set me up for the visual. So it seems like if I don't tell them I just took the handoff, they think that I'm a new airplane into their system. That makes sense.
I have a feeling what's really happened there, you said it's at some point it changed over.
I'm still squawking. I've just come out of IMC.
Yeah.
I'm in VMC conditions now. What was that? It was probably 20 miles north of that.
Well, if you're, so you're IFR.
Right.
Is that true? The controller, the radar controller, the center of the approach control, the center in this case, right?
Center.
Is he's required to give a position for an IFR inbound and a visual approach. He's required to give a position prior to
never did see it
to the tower. Or
To the tower.
Yeah. So he gives him your position now.
That's what I would have thought.
But that doesn't, I don't know, I don't recall what the regs say about, what you're supposed to say when you check on the tower. I'm not instrument rated, but my instinct as a VFR pilot is when I check in on the tower, is always tell them where I am and what my intentions are.
But it would be,
or what I'm doing.
what I interpreted prior to changing my phraseology some years ago because of the trouble with the handoff, my interpretation was that I was doing it was like going from sector to sector. I don't have to tell them where I'm at. All I have to do is verify altitude, 1000 Tango checking in level 7000, done. And versus saying, well, I'm 28 miles west of Spokane and doing this and going to Missoula.
Right.
So it's here I would have thought it would have been the same thing. They already know that I'm coming. Why all of a sudden am I a new arrival?
I can ask the area next to that area. There may be several things. That tower, I don't know if they have a radar display in the tower that gives them a feed from the center. That may be the case. And maybe sometime in the last few years, they got that. So now they actually know where they can see it. There might be some sort of automation that's actually taking place between the center and the tower, giving them a more specific position or an update on where you are, when you're going to be to the airport, or something like that. So,
Since I changed how I approach that, I have had zero problems.
That's
I
good.
just tell them I
Took the
handoff,
It's interesting.
checking in, handoff from Seattle Center,
Yeah.
and zero problems. Okay.
Gary, a number of years ago, the airliners were instructed, coming into SeaTac, for instance, to simply give the call sign of the airplane when you're handed off to tower. Tower, Alaska Airline, Alaska 68. Ordinarily, Alaska 68, clear line running 16 right, wind is such and such. But 90% of the time, you say Tower, Alaska 68. Go ahead.
Right.
Oh, yeah, coming in for runway 16 right, right, clear line 16 right. So that fell apart almost instantly.
Right.
It's sort of out of bounds of what controllers expect to hear from an airplane. If they just hear an airplane check on and just give their call sign, it's a question or something.
Right.
I think maybe that's a good point.
The controllers still expect the pilot to repeat a clearance. Clear for takeoff, clear for landing, you should always copy Roger, clear for takeoff. Yeah.
I would, yes.
Yeah, that's a requirement. So when you're on the center frequency, if you're giving him an assigned altitude, you're going to expect him to repeat back to you the assigned altitude.
Absolutely, and the AIM says that, yeah.
And yes, that's true. And I give VFRs on occasion, and I notice that pilots aren't doing that. They get a clearance for takeoff. They don't repeat back their clearance.
Yeah. In the airport environment, I don't give clearances off, I give clearances off the ground, but I don't give takeoff clearances or landing clearances. I give approach clearances and departure clearances.
But you get readbacks for that, right?
Absolutely. And when I get a readback, I expect, I mean, if it's a full IFR, I'm gonna expect all the numbers involved.
Right.
In some form or another, yeah.
But when you go, you tell the controller you're on a VFR flight following, you tell them you're climbing to 7,500. I always tell them level at 7,500. He wants to hear that, doesn't he?
That's good, yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
And going back to what Doug said also, he said checking in with you. I've read a lot of stuff says that's ATC garbage. Don't say that. But I always did in my air carrier life because it kind of leads into the fact that you're coming from another place in the system to the new guy's place in the system. So I'm with you, at 7,500. So
It's happened to me where I have, because you'll come in, you'll take the sector from somebody, there's call signs all over, you're not familiar with all of them quite yet.
Right.
The guy's been on the frequency for a while, and he has a question, he just comes up and states his call sign. Immediately we go into, oh, it's somebody new calling me, and they, oh no, I'm over here, I'm IFR at 12,000, and you're like, oh, that's kind of embarrassing. So that's good, it's not standard, but it works.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's better to say checking in, level 5,000, or just 5 Hotel Papa, level 5,000? Because he's expecting you, because he's getting the handout.
When you check on him with the full call sign and in your altitude.
But not the words checking in?
No, I'm not saying you can't do it in cases where if the controller seems confused, like he thinks you're a new, you're just checking out for flight following, but it's not necessarily 90% of the time.
Even on final and CT. Alaska 68, who's he?
And the tower has radar in the tower. They have it displayed, so that's one reason they have a better idea sometimes who that airplane is and where he is, and maybe they react.
Well, I've always lived by the phrase or the admonition of, if the pilot screws up, the pilot dies. If ATC screws up, the pilot dies.
Right. My recommendation would be use the proper phraseology that's in the AIM whenever possible.
But the trust but verify, that's really kind of a gray area.
It is.
If I get a vector that's a 270-degree turn, I'll say, you want the long way around to 270?
Right. No, that's good.
And so that doesn't annoy them. They said, well, that's what I said.
It might annoy some controllers. It's not going to annoy me. If I'm giving you if you're on a 360 heading and I'm giving you a right turn to 270, I'm probably going to be aware that's going to sound a little weird to you and I'm going to give it. So I'm going to reiterate, that's a right turn, something like that,
Or would you say that, I know it's the long way around, but that's where I want you to go?
Yeah, maybe. I might. Depends on how urgent the situation is.
Yeah.
It's frequent when I'm on a catching a flight plan, it's frequent to get to the airport or a closer distance that I'd like at an altitude that's too high. And what should a pilot do that sees that profile isn't going to be something that is going to be to your best advantage or your best liking,
Or even doable.
or to your ears, what would you like to hear that descent when able, Bonanza 1000 Tango lower when able, something like that? What would you like to hear that works for you? And
So you're telling me
instead of a pilot.
situation.
Well, I flew into Richland the other day, and I think it went over 11,000 feet, and I got the descent to 9, and I think it was 30, like 30, 35 miles out of Richland at 9,000 feet. That doesn't work.
You're too far out.
Too high.
Well, you're too high.
Too high.
What are you gonna do? You've got the, you know.
Oh, I see what you're saying, okay.
Yeah.
If you need lower, yeah, just ask for lower, if you need lower.
Okay, but, so what I'm saying is that from a pilot standpoint, you see yourself, you know you're too high, and you say, all right, well, I'm going to wait for the controller to lower me, because obviously he's got a conflict because he's not.
Sometimes they may not understand that you want lower,
Or just say lower when able.
When can we expect lower? Senator, when can we expect lower? How many miles, how many minutes, whatever helps for you.
Okay.
And they should be able to tell
Because
you.
you may be busy doing something else and you don't see that gap closing up.
Yeah, and it goes to some controllers not having a good sense of what's too high and what's not, right? In terms of the distance from the airport. I see that a lot.
So you're saying that controllers haven't memorized all the different aircraft types, glide ratios?
That's right.
And you know, the thing to remember is the pilot command is the final authority in the airplane and making the decisions. And it's okay to piss off the controller if you need to. And if
Can I quote you on that, Gary?
I've done it lots. And if you have an infraction, then you'll have to pay for that when you get on the ground. But pilot command is final authority.
Yeah, but, right. If safety is involved and you need to do something,
Right.
the controller's not, then yeah, absolutely do what you need to do. In this case, maybe not. You're asking lower, I wouldn't bust your altitude just because.
No, I'm not talking about that.
Right.
I'm just talking
Yeah.
about it. I'm too close. How am I gonna get out of the sky?
Yeah, just let us know. Tell us that you want lower and you're expecting lower.
All right.
Yeah.
Ask for 360, ask for 2 of them. I've had to do that.
Yeah.
Controller kept me high, and it's just not gonna work out. I can't come down final like this. I need
Yeah.
a 360 right turn. Approved. Works great.
Right.
Isn't the pilot's most valuable word unable, anyway?
Yep.
Captain Sully
Get
used it,
that
I
while
think,
you're
3
gliders.
times before he went swimming.
Yeah, that goes, tell us what you need. If you're too high, or you're too fast, or we have put you in a position that's not gonna
Maintain 2,500.
allow you to make a stable approach, by all means, tell us. Sorry, yeah.
Going back to this handoff business, if you hand me off to a colleague of yours,
Yeah.
who completes that transaction? Does he get that from you? I'm giving you this guy? Or does he need to hear it from me?
99% of the time it's automated.
So I'm already on his screen anyway, right?
Yep.
So he should expect me
He
then.
gets the same flight data. If I entered it, he gets all that data.
Yeah.
Or if somebody else entered it, and I get it from them, and down the line it goes.
So if I'm going through Whitby, which I do semi-regularly, I'll get handed off and I'll get the controller will tell me contact Joe on 120.7. And I do it.
Yeah.
Is it redundant? Does he know I'm there? He must know I'm there.
Yeah. If all they've done, if they told you that they didn't terminate you and.
No, just
Yeah.
going from one sector to another.
Yeah, and you just check on with your call sign and your altitude.
Okay, so he should hear from me then.
Yeah.
Okay, good enough.
There are cases, there's some approach controls that we don't have, between facilities,
Yeah.
center and approach controls, for instance, small ones, we don't have the flight data. In my area, the Kingsley Approach Control, we don't have flight data transfers with them, so we have to do manual handoffs on the phone with them.
I see, okay.
For VFR and IFR. So, but he'll still know who you are,
Yeah.
but it's not automated.
Isn't the data blanking at that point?
Yeah, we call it a flash, when we flash a data block to somebody else, and they take the hand. Yeah.
Does the FAA to you have some sort of policy relative to reporting us when we screw up some rule? Or
It's left up to the judgment of the controller.
do they always say that, or do they say these sorts of things you must report, these sort of things you can overlook, or,
Do they still have the NASA reporting system?
Yes.
Yeah.
The ASRS?
Yeah.
That's, yeah, for the pilots have the ASRS system. Controllers have our own program. It's pretty much identical to that. It lets us anonymously report
Yeah.
safety issues and operational issues that we see. And NASA actually brings all that data together to look at both sides of it.
The dreaded words for me were always, upon landing, contact the tower.
Yeah.
Here's the phone
I've heard that a couple of times over the years.
It does, it depends on what happens. That's, I mean, if you're IFR and you bust a clearance, and if it's a serious, if it actually ends up being a separation issue, for me personally, if you're IFR and I'm working you and something happens, and this has happened, for instance, good weather, pilots doing, 2 of them in a sky lane doing practice approaches on an IFR clearance in good weather, and flew the mist, but instead of climbing to 3,000 on the mist, he climbed to 4,000. I didn't have any traffic in the area. And I just said to him on the second time around, I said, the mist approach altitude is 3,000. Just want to give you a heads up, there was no traffic in this case, no harm, no foul. Just be careful, because you don't know if there's traffic. Even if the weather's beautiful, I might still have somebody there. And so.
But John's question is, do you have to report that when it's at that much of an altitude excursion?
I don't have to, no.
Okay.
If there was somebody else there, and I lost separation because of something that a pilot did, then I really do have to report it, because what happens is if we get audited, or I get audited, and they find out that this happened, and I didn't tell them that it happened, I'm in big trouble. So, whenever possible, when something like that does happen, IFR or VFR, my personal view is I always try to just, it's no harm, no foul, and I tell the pilot what happened, and I try to talk about it and understand what happened, and as quickly as I can. Depends, sometimes I can't, I'm busy, but.
Do you think most controllers have your attitude, or not?
I don't think most controllers do.
Unfortunately,
I'm trying to spread it a little bit, but it's hard. It's some of the more senior controllers have a more hard-lined attitude about it sometimes.
I had a controller one time call, I was using Boeing Flying Club airplanes, and for some reason he thought he could see what I looked at in the cockpit, and he called the Boeing Flying Club and told them I landed below RVR minimums.
Really?
And I was booted out of the Flying Club. I thought that was kind of an unusual thing for, and I think that's back in the days we had ATC controllers. Well, I don't know.
It's pretty harsh, yeah.
Did you?
Pardon me, did I?
Did you land below RVR minimums? That's
I
pretty.
could see the runway.
No, I know.
That's legal. So what was Boeing Flying Club's heartburn with that? That sounds legal.
Well, it was below RVR minimums, they said. But they can't see what the pilot sees.
Right. Leniency, that's a tough thing, isn't it? Because you didn't have a conflict, but why did the guy misread his approach play? Why did he go up to 4,000 feet?
Yeah.
Are you aiding and abetting someone that maybe ought not be in the air? It starts to get kind of like, friends that maybe shouldn't be flying their planes anymore. And are you, it's a tough thing to say, hey, So that leniency thing is a tough critter.
It's true. I think based on what you said there, I think, I'll try to be lenient when I can, but make it very clear that it's a serious issue.
And what's the spanking involved if you call who you need to call and say, well, by the way, this guy just went to 4 instead of 3? What happens then? Maybe a notation's made.
In those cases, I think if there's no separation error involved, then I think what's going to happen is if I were to report it to my supervisor, most supervisors, if I make it clear, I don't want, this is not a big deal, but I want them to know that this is wrong. Most supervisors will make the phone call and have that discussion and make it clear that there's not going to be any penalty or anything in this case, but sort of a warning, if you will.
But it starts a paper trail. If it happens 5 more times, it's like, huh.
Yeah,
I mean, right?
true.
And this guy gets help when he needs help. So that leniency, like I say, that's a tough animal.
It is tough, yeah. Thank you.
Any comment on the computerized niche program?
Not really. I don't really know.
You don't have it in your area, automated infraction.
There may, I actually don't know. There may be one, there may not be one. They don't really, they try to keep us out of the loop on that one. Probably for a reason. We do have a program, the program that I was telling you about, it's like ASRS, it's called the ATSAP, Air Traffic Safety Action Program. Anonymous, and we can fill it out, but it's anonymous to, the data is anonymized, but it does protect us in those situations where something's happened, we're not sure, should we report this or not, or we're worried about how it would affect us on a professional level, then we can use that system, and it does provide us some immunity. So that's in case, so that program is really, really helpful because we don't know what they see and they don't see. And it actually has helped a lot of things that were gone, used to go unreported. Things get reported now. So it's much better than it used to be.
To a certain level, they're reported. I mean, you don't want to use that credit card every 3rd time you fly. That ASRS.
Yeah.
You make a blunder, you didn't intentionally make the blunder, you tell the aviation safety reporting system, oops, boy did I screw up, here's what I did. Didn't intend to do it, of course, but I made the mistake so others might learn. And you mail it to them.
That's your best get out of jail free card.
And they decide, yeah, that's legitimate, everybody makes mistakes, thank you for letting us know. We'll concentrate on trying to make a way around this for other people. But you do that every 3 days, your name's in lights. So you kind of balance the use of that ASRS. You're not getting 100% participation.
We had that debate about our program too, because before I was hired, years ago, I don't know how many years ago exactly, but there used to be a 3 strikes you're out program for controllers. They had an operational error, separation error or something of that matter, then they had 3 of those, then they could be fired. The Climber General FAA who wants more data now and wants people to self-report and things like that, we don't have that anymore. So the question goes, well, is that better or worse? Now that people feel like they have that get out of jail free card, so it's a fine line. So the last, yeah.
Are you done, or?
If everybody wants me to cover the last couple of things.
I was just going to say, we can sort of
yeah, if you feel like.
terminate the official meeting, and people can come and ask you questions if anybody needs to leave. I don't want to chase anybody away, but I want to make sure people don't think that, feel bad about leaving if they need to. Because this is all very good. Really appreciate your.
I'm glad it's working.
Your helpfulness.
This is really good for me too. So the last couple of things I was going to talk about, somebody, you alluded to this, Doug, unsure what drive hard, you're unsure what the plan is or what our plan is for you or how you fit into it, just ask. Senator, can we or should we expect higher or lower? When? What's our sequence? Are we number 1, 2, 3? Are we last? Which approach can we expect? Are we going to be vectored for that approach? Can we expect direct initial or intermediate fix? Are we going to get holding? Further clearance? There are some things we are required to tell you to expect, what approach to expect if you're on part of this. The controller is actually going to issue you that approach clearance is told when you check on with him, he's required to, at some point in the first few minutes, to actually tell you what approach to expect, so you can get ready for that. But based, again, on workload, busy we are, we may not get to it right away or as soon as you would like to know. So just ask. So for the pop-up IFR, I think he left. But, so it sounds like we have a lot of IFR pilots in here. How many of you get pop-up IFR clinics routinely? Or, no?
What's routinely?
Well, I guess, how, have you ever done it? Okay. When you do fly IFR, do you normally just get it off the ground then? Yeah. That's good, I would recommend that. It puts us, that's what this talks about, it puts us in a different position when you call airborne. Sometimes, depends on in the situation, depends on your altitude really, and the terrain. The aim and the regulations for IFR pilots departing off the ground, we clear you as filed or clear you off the ground via an ODP or a SID. If we clear you as filed, the regulations tell us that really the pilot is responsible for getting from the airport to the en route, or to his route structure. So we're required to give you a safe altitude initially, but if we just clear you as filed, it's up to the pilot to make it responsible to get from point A to his route, unless we assign a SID or otherwise. So when you're airborne and you request an IFR, that's what changes. Is now we have to figure out, is terrain a factor? So if you're below my minimum IFR altitude, then some controllers in that situation may or may not ask you the question, which is in our procedures, in our phraseology, very specifically, and any controller, or center controller at least, will be able to can spit it out without even thinking. But verify you can maintain your own terrain obstruction clearance through 9,000 feet, 10,000 feet, whatever the case may be. So if you call me, whether you have a flight following already or not, and you're below my minimum IFR altitude, and in my area, depending on where you are, that minimum IFR altitude ranges from 3,000 feet to just off the coast to up to 9,000, 10,000 feet if you're on the east side of the mountains in the high plain area. And in the vicinity of those mountains, Mount Shasta, for instance, is 15,900 feet. So, because it's defined based on the 2,000 feet in a mountainous area or 1,000 feet in the non-mountainous area. Pretty much everything in the Seattle Center is, except for this part of the Puget Sound, I think, is mountainous defined. So, 2,000 feet above the highest obstacle in that area. So I have on my map little segments that are depicted that show very specific altitudes where I'm not allowed to provide my own route guidance below those altitudes to an IFR aircraft for liability reasons, because I don't know what's out there. So if you are VFR below those altitudes and you ask for an IFR pop-up, they may, like I said, they may ask you that question. Our rules say that if we have any reason to believe that you can't maintain visual flight above the MIA, then we're required to ask that question. So a day like today, if I'm VFR flight following 10, 15 aircraft, I'm having aircraft departing Roseburg, for instance, VFR in and out all day from low altitude up below my MIA. I know the weather's good. It's 10 and clear, it's beautiful. You pop up VFR below the MIA, I'm going to say cleared as filed. If you ask for a specific new routing, then I might say leaving 5,000, which is my MIA, cleared to via. If you request a specific heading, I might say verify you can maintain your own terrain obstruction clearance through 5,000 on the 340 heading, something like that. They might just, based on what the situation is, they might just come up with what works. So, yeah.
When you say terrain and obstruction clearance, that doesn't mean that you can't go IMC to go up.
Not necessarily, but it's your well, how do you define it? That's what we're putting on you.
You're not gonna hit a mountain or you know where you're at. You know, you can go up to get to that.
Yeah.
Say you have to go through the clouds to get up there. Are you keeping us an IFR clearance before that?
We are.
Okay.
We are, in that case, you are separating yourself from terrain and obstructions.
Right.
We are still your IFR, and we're separating you from airplanes and other airspace for our terms. But we're separating you from other airplanes in that case. We have to say that so that you know that you're responsible for your terrain and
It clears
obstruction.
to climb to, say, 7,000 feet, but you say that other phrase, maintain your own terrain and obstruction clearance.
Right.
You say, yes, that's affirmative, then we can do it.
Right, and really, if I don't nail you down and I say, you know, and you say affirmative, all I say is through 7,000 feet. If you need to do a 360 or something, you know, that's up to you.
Yeah, we go
I would let the
IMC
controller
to-
know. They may not
Go
anticipate.
IMC to do that then.
Yes. So has anybody ever had a controller, when they try to get a pop-up, tell them they had to go to flight service first in order to file it?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I put this in here then. So,
Try
I've heard this, I actually haven't seen any controllers in my area do it, but I've heard of controllers doing it in other areas or prior. That's why I put it in here.
The only place that's ever happened to me that seemed like it was vindictive was at Salt Lake City. I was coming back from Oshkosh and going through a cycle, a chart cycle.
Oh.
And so the departure procedure had a different number on it than I had on my charts. And he said, nope, can't give you that. You go talk to flight service.
You were on the ground then?
And I was on the ground and getting the clearance out of there. And the only difference between the revision and the one I had was something that didn't have anything to do with what my flight was all about.
That's different than this, but that's, that's unfortunate.
But I mean, it's just, the way the controllers sometimes are just not, even got up on the wrong side of the bed or something.
Yeah, true. It's
These
true.
guys are the greatest, let me tell you. You should find a JFK every day. It's like, they argue with you there, that's part of the national sport.
But Seattle, I've never had any issues.
Well, that's good. It sounds like some have,
Years.
good.
Years.
Well, I just have, my recommendation is if it does happen to you, bottom line is, we're not allowed to use it. Unless it's for traffic, you can't issue, and tell you that, I can't issue an IFR because there's traffic right next to you, or whatever the case may be, preventing me from doing it. There's nothing that prevents me from doing that. It says I can't do, I have to give you the IFR if you're requesting to try to. It's amazing.
Well, we have a helicopter pilot over here who thinks he owns this part of the world.
Come to the meeting.
So if that does happen, I would just insist, due to weather or safety of flight, you need an IFR clearance now rather than later. If they still refuse, and you don't need to declare an emergency or anything, take care of it, come back, get your flight, get your clearance, get set up, on course and everything, and then once you have everything, have a moment, I would ask the controller for a phone number. And
Ask him
even
for
if it's
his-
not the same one that you talked to.
You asking for his initials as well, so you know who?
No, you just need the date and the time and your call sign.
Okay.
They can find you. They'll figure out who was talking to you. They don't need to know. And then when you get on the ground, call the facility and talk to someone, because it's wrong. I'm glad to hear that that's not common. Like I said, I haven't seen it, but I just don't want anybody to get the impression that that controllers actually have the right to do that. So, and if it does happen and something unsafe happens, or you feel like it was unsafe, then I would encourage you to file a report to the ASR.
Yeah, coming back from Chelan, that pop-up was, boy, it was like no big deal.
We were coming in at 10, coming across the mountains, and we thought we could do it VFR, but it became apparent that it was just going to get too hazy and too solid below. And just came up and said, we're unable to maintain VFR, we need a clearance into Bremerton. And they picked us up, brought us down. On that same, I missed a bunch in the middle. Did we discuss Pyrex?
A little.
A little bit, but
Do you want to hear, when, you know, when we're in a situation like that, where we're coming down, you know, I understand PIREPs to flight watch, but that, you know, the Seattle Center tops in this area are 10.5.
Yeah,
You know,
we do.
solid IMC below, do you need to know that? Do you want to hear that?
We do, yeah, we do. Because what happens is like with icing, tops are invaluable, right? So we want to know that. Sometimes when it's beautiful and tinted clear, severe, you know, beautiful, somebody will, hey, you got pirate for yeah, we know. Thanks for telling us it's 10 in a million, you know, that kind of thing. But but significant weather is
You know,
what
I don't
we
want to clog the frequency.
Yeah.
You don't hear it too often, so you hate to come up with it.
Yeah.
But bases are, tops are, solid
Bases and
IMC.
tops are big for us.
Gary, is this myth or fact? If a pilot calls you and says, I have a PIREP, you must take it? I heard that once.
Depends on
Or
what
if you use the word PIREP, controller's got to grab his pen.
No, depends on what you're reporting. We're required to report certain things that you, certain things that you report. So if you tell us it's, the visibility's 10 miles, it's beautiful, there's no clouds, we're not required to fill one out. But if you tell us there's any light or greater icing, any light, or actually moderate or greater turbulence, thunderstorm activity, tornadoes, we don't get those around here very often. There are certain things that we are required to report. If the weather is reported 5 and 5, below 5,000 feet ceilings and 5 miles visibility at any of our ASOS, AWOS reporting points, and we have an aircraft going in and out of there, we're required to get a base and tops report.
Would you rather we went off frequency, so, you know, instead of going off frequency for a minute, go to flight watch, give it to them, and then come back and report up?
Most cases, if it's, especially if it's significant, even bases and tops, that's really easy to just give us. I would say give it to us. Yeah, because the only time we actually get most of the ones that you file through flight service, we only get them if they're urgent. So if it's a standard non-urgent one, then we won't see it. So we would prefer.
Right.
So what's more the scuttlebutt at work about some of the stuff pilots do that just makes your eyes roll? Surely you guys check.
You can tell us.
They fly. Yeah, stuff they say, how they say it, whatever. Some stories, you gotta have some stories.
Oh, man. Let's see, there's nothing in here.
You won't offend us, because this is all gonna be funny anyway.
Sure, sure, at all.
I don't know, I mean, trying to, I touched on some of them as far as pet peeves go, leaving the frequency, stuff like that. What do we talk about?
Stuff pilots say?
Stuff pilots say.
How they say it?
Well,
I've flown with guys that can't say 10 words without using 50.
We had a pilot the other day who took a squawk code as a frequency, which was interesting. I had not seen that before. And he actually this was high altitude, and he was told, he came on the frequency, we had a new code to issue for automation issues, and we said to him, you know, so-and-so reset the transponder squawk. And he took him a second to reply, and then he came back and he 3415, and he was gone. You know, and it's like, wait. Then he comes back a minute later. He's, what was that frequency again? You know, no, it wasn't frequency.
Did you come back and ask what that squawk was again?
Right.
Well, at least he knew to come back to the old frequency.
That's because how his oxygen system was working.
Yeah. Yeah, we joke about that sometimes. It's not something to joke about, though, if you think about it. Like, we hear somebody who sounds like they're drunk or something, or mumbly, or, you know, sleepy, or a lot of some of the professional pilots, you know, their hours are pretty brutal, right? So they sound pretty sleepy sometimes. But it could be hypoxia. We don't know. So we joke about it sometimes, but it could be serious.
What do you do if you lose communications with a VFR or flight follow flight? What's your process?
That's a big deal for us. If we lose radios and radar on you, radios and radar at the same time, simultaneously. we start going down the search and rescue path basically at that point.
How
So,
about just communications, you see them flying off into the.
just communications, in that case, we still see on radar, then we're gonna do things to try to get a hold of you. Based on workload, we may or may not really work that hard to do that, depends on the situation. If we see traffic, then we're gonna really work. You know, I'm gonna call other aircraft to try to relay a message, maybe you went into a area of radio coverage that's close to me, because where my transmitter is, then yeah, I'll try to relay through another aircraft. Sometimes we'll go to high altitude aircraft. If I don't have anybody nearby enough, low, I'll call Alaska Airlines flight and say, hey, we need to get a hold of this guy, can you relay for us?
You're trying to get hold of them somehow.
Yeah.
Is there
I've called aircraft in the blind. It happens in a couple different ways. Sometimes you provide flight following or IFR into an airport, and then the guy doesn't squawk VFR. Comes back out an hour or two later. I have traffic inbound. He's not talking to me, but he's traffic for somebody, and I can see him, and I see his code, and I'll look in my pile of flight strips and find that code and say, oh, hey, November so-and-so, are you on the frequency? Lo and behold, there he is. Yeah, and call the traffic. That happened to me yesterday too. Or, and this has happened, a couple controllers at Seattle Center had a big save a few years ago from that exact situation when it's a couple airplanes that neither of them we were talking to but were on the frequency monitoring. They called up in the blind, aircraft 10 miles west of so-and-so, aircraft 20 miles east of whatever it was, at 8,500 and 8,500, you know, appeared to be on collision course. There was traffic 12 o'clock, called the traffic and ended up saving these guys. So, yeah, another reason to call for flight following.
What's the sort of the polite way of saying, you just changed RCOs and I can't hear you anymore? Could you change back, please, or be aware?
Change the transmitter?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we should.
Because all of a sudden it starts to get, I can hardly hear the guy, it's not even breaking the squelch, but I know I'm still need to hear him. How do I let him know that RCO isn't working for me?
Just, I would just say, you know, so-and-so radio check.
Just radio check?
Yeah,
Okay.
and then because if I change transmitters, because I'm talking to somebody else, somewhere else, and I hear you ask for a radio check, I'm gonna come back to the transmitter that's closest to you.
Okay, then that gives me the
And then
clue
you'll know,
that.
oh, now I hear him, that's
Okay.
great. And I might even mention to you, you know, I have several transmitters, you may not hear me as well.
Well, we know that, but I mean, it's just, if he expects me to hear him for something important, I'm
Yeah.
not hearing him on that transmitter.
It's a limitation of the system, unfortunately. The VHS system
But
is,
just radio check will sort of start that
Yeah.
conversation, okay?
yeah.
What if you tell me the radio's sounds kind of thin?
Yeah, we
I
tell
can't hear
you-
you very well.
Yeah,
That'll work, huh?
yeah, we try, definitely.
If that's a
We can't
longer
hear you very well, we'll
conversation
tell
than
you.
radio check.
Yeah, that's true. So I think that's pretty much it. I just recapped real quick here. And then we just went through a lot of different questions.
Well, thank you very much, Garrett. That was terrific.
Thank you.